Strap in and get ready for a full-speed, action-packed ride through the heart-stopping moments in the history of stock car racing. In NASCAR's great moments, the early years, we start at the beginning when history was being made with every drop of the checkered flag. We start with the birth of the sport on the hard-packed sands of Daytona and join the crazy cast of characters from NASCAR's roots. The likes of Tim Flock driving with a monkey as his co-pilot, hell-bent moonshiner Junior Johnson, and the take-no-prisoners Lee Petty. And you'll be in the driver's seat for some of the great races in the first decades of NASCAR racing, like the first Daytona 500, decided in a photo finish. We'll witness the birth of the great tracks, like Darlington, the place they call the Lady in Black, and the track Too Tough to Tame. And we'll relive the season of all seasons in racing history, the year when the great Richard Petty earned his crown as the king.
Now it would be really, really hard for anybody to come in and dominate over a period of time like what I've been able to do, to be in the forefront. I won't say dominate, to be in the forefront as many years as what I've been.
With rare footage, we'll bring to life the great moments in NASCAR's fantastic, thrill-filled history. Don't miss NASCAR's great moments, the early years. It's the ride of a lifetime. And also look for our other great NASCAR tapes like Jeff Gordon, Triumph of a Dream, and Legendary Tracks, Unforgettable Moments. Also from Sony Music Video.
Courage, tenacity, patience, nerves of steel, plus just plain guts. These are the ingredients that are common among the men who sit behind the wheel of a NASCAR race car. But a few have something more, something that has made them great, made them legends, made them almost immortal. Men driven to succeed and bound by no foreseen limitations. Men who have risen to the top of the toughest sport, defined it, and transcended it, each in their own way. Hello everyone, I'm Jerry Punch. At the end of this, we'll reveal the results of our NASCAR video poll of the top 10 drivers of all time. The men we'll meet came from the farms of the South, the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee, the sands of Daytona, the sandhills of South Carolina, all the way to the swamps of Alabama. Guys who were known as Fireball, the Silver Fox, the Intimidator, and the King. All have contributed to the makeup of the sport and have impacted its history like no other. Now let's start by taking a look at a driver whose name would span 6 decades and 3 generations in the sport. The name, of course, is Petty. In this case, the patriarch of the clan, arguably the toughest of the trio, Lee.
You know, he was one of the guys that kind of came along that was rough and tumble and would borrow your car and flip it in a race and then say thanks for the ride and leave you hanging there with your wrecked car. If people think Earnhardt's rough, I don't think he was in the same league with Lee Petty.
Lee Petty came from a farming background. It didn't matter what surface, dirt or asphalt, or the length of the track, he won. Lee was a churlish man whose desire to win overshadowed anything else in his life, and he'd do anything to reach victory lane. In a career that spanned 16 years from 1949 to 1961, Feisty Lee was one of the best. He was a 3-time Grand National champion in 1954, 1958, and 1959.
Lee was one of the first ones that I really started watching that was trying to make a living of the race. And he was a tough driver. He would go into an area that the local drivers would know the tracks. And they would get him a car and go ahead and run against him. But they found out right quick that he studied this type of racing. And he knew what it took to run 100 miles. And he was just tough, and he didn't give any quarters to anybody. I mean, If he got under you, you better let him go or he's gonna move you. And not in a mean way, but that was just the way racing was back then.
Lee didn't give anyone a break on the racetrack, including his own son. In fact, in 1959, it looked like son Richard was en route to his first ever stock car victory. But it was a controversial finish, with Lee finishing second. Now, Lee had the officials recount the scoring cards, and sure enough, they found an error and awarded Lee the win. In fact, he was so driven to win that one story has it, back during the 50s, that he put wing nuts and armor plating on the side of his Oldsmobile. This way, when he came up alongside an opponent, he'd shred their sheet metal and wreck their chances of winning. But remember, that's just legend.
Lee Petty was a very tough competitor. He would race you hard, but he was fair, as fair as you could be back in those days, running on primarily dirt tracks or short asphalt tracks, all of which were one groove racetracks, and you just literally had to bump someone to get them out of the way to pass them. I remember in 1959, I had an opportunity to drive a 57 Ford that was owned by Paul Spaulding, and Junior Johnson had been driving that car. Junior didn't want that car to race at Columbia on the dirt track and then run at Wilkesboro on Sunday because he wanted the car in tip-top shape to run in front of his hometown folks. And so he got sick the day of the race at Columbia. So Bud Allman was the crew chief on the car, and he called me and said, hey, we don't know if Junior's going to show up or not, but said the boss said to take that car to Columbia and race it. And said, call Ned and see if he would be interested in going along. And if Junior don't show up, he can drive the car. So boy, I jumped at the opportunity. I rode with him down to Columbia, and sure enough, Junior didn't show up, so I drove the car. And late in the race, I got used to the thing and started towards the front, and Lee Petty was running second. And I caught him going into 3. I'd been trying to pass him and couldn't get by him, but I got a fender a little bit up beside him going into 3, and I went on into the turn and hit him and knocked him up into the loose stuff and passed him. And so after the race, we were standing in the pay line to get money. That's the way they did it back then. They'd line up to get their money after the race. And he came up and said, boy, said, were you driving that number 11 car? I said, yes, sir, I was. He said, you got a few things to learn about this business. He said, you don't just go out there knocking people around to get by them. I said, well, sir, I had tried to pass you clean, and I tried my best, and you kept cutting me off. And I said, it's time to go. The race was getting close to an end. He said, well, I said, you better learn a lesson from that. So went on. So went to Wilkesboro then on Sunday, and I was walking down through the pits, and Lee said, Jarrett, he said, don't you have anything to drive? And I said, no, sir, don't have anything. He said, well, Lord, if we'd have known that, we'd have brought you a car up here to drive. And man, he just made my day after chewing me out, you know, a couple of nights before that at Columbia. But it taught me that, hey, I got the respect of the man.
Lee's 54 career wins were a NASCAR record until 1967, when his son Richard got the old man again, breaking his record. In 1959, NASCAR made the transition from the bull rings and dirt tracks and entered the superspeedway era, and Lee Petty adapted easily to the times. The lead that day swapped hands 33 times among 7 drivers. Lee Petty and Johnny Beauchamp would stage a dramatic dash to the finish, crossing the line in seemingly a dead heat. Both cars were clocked at 135.521 miles per hour. Originally, Beauchamp was declared the winner, but the fiery Petty wouldn't give an inch in his argument to NASCAR, insisting he won.
Johnny Beauchamp, he and I were running on the last lap. And going out of the third turn, up fourth turn there, he went high and I went low. I went across the finish line, and somebody said, well, how'd you know you won the race? I said, I looked out the window and I had to look back when I went across the finish line.
It took NASCAR officials 61 hours and careful deciphering of 7 different photographs to decide to reverse their decision and give Petty the win.
At that time, he was a win at all costs. You know, he was that type of driver. It didn't make any difference. I think it showed, you know, when he won the first Daytona 500, when they were racing back to the caution, and it took, you know, an extra day to figure out who had won the race. He never quit racing until it was time to quit racing. And I think that one photo and that one race pretty much epitomizes what he meant and what he was in racing.
Ironically, Daytona, the site of Petty's great victory 2 years later, would be the stage for his final appearance at a racetrack. Just like 1959, Petty would be battling Johnny Beauchamp, this time in a qualifying race. When on the last lap, the two locked bumpers in the third turn and both cars hurdled the guardrail. Lee suffered a punctured lung, multiple fractures of his left chest, a fractured left thigh, a broken collarbone, and multiple internal injuries. Beauchamp had multiple head injuries. It would turn out to be Lee's last ride. Lee Petty was one tough race car driver. His tenacity and competitiveness was instilled in another driver we'll meet later on in our tape. But the next driver to make our list is a man who was known for his antics both on and off the racetrack. But his influence was felt beyond the car, as he was responsible for the building of one of NASCAR's crown jewels. His name, Curtis Turner. Turner was the quintessential party boy. In fact, he had a saying, if you feel bad enough before you start a race, nothing can happen to bother you. Curtis always knew how far he could push his car and made up for what the car lacked. His driving style was the inspiration for the drivers of his generation.
When he and Joe Weatherly used to run on the beach course together, they had team cars. They'd come down that beach, and about a quarter of a mile before they would get to the first turn or the north turn, they would turn those cars sideways and slide all the way down that track into that corner. They were two of the best showmanship drivers I've ever looked at. And basically, Curtis was the same way on dirt, on the tracks that he ran. He not only ran fast, he put on a good show for the fans.
He could handle a car and take it right to the limit. Everybody runs on the edge. They ran just a hair over that edge and were able to hold on to the car and keep it and bring it back and win races with it. Earnhardt is very much like him in driving style, very much like Junior Johnson in driving style. Go flat out, run with your foot, but it has to be tapered with running with your head too.
Turner truly loved the sport and was considered a visionary. His dream was to build a beautiful speedway in Charlotte. And in 1960, despite lots of obstacles, he, along with partner Bruton Smith, saw his vision of the speedway come true as Charlotte hosted the first 600. Turner had 19 career Grand National victories and an amazing 38 career victories in the convertible series. One of Curtis's great wins was the 1956 Southern 500 at the circuit's toughest track, Darlington. Turner's love for speed and excitement didn't end at the racetrack. He loved to fly airplanes. Unfortunately, he would die a victim of a plane crash on October 5th, 1970. 20 minutes after taking off, his plane crashed near Dubois, Pennsylvania. He was one of the originals who raced from the beaches to the speedways, always giving the fans their money's worth. Joe Weatherly was Curtis Turner's sidekick, and though he didn't make it on our list of greatest drivers of all time, Little Joe was a great one. He was known for his brave driving style, but also for his practical jokes he played and his superstitions. He was so superstitious the other drivers would drive him crazy. Joe thought the color green was bad luck, so naturally his fellow drivers brought him something green or threw some peanuts on his seat to jinx him. Joe had 24 NASCAR victories in his short career.
Every winter they'd go around the Carolinas and have dinners to treat the press, you know. And Joe Weatherly was there and had a fake snake, and a waiter went by with a tray full of champagne glasses, and Weatherly threw the snake, which looked very real, around that waiter's neck. And I can still see that tray in slow motion, and all those champagne glasses just crashing everywhere.
Curtis Turner and Joe Weatherly were two of the many heroes that molded the sport of NASCAR racing into what it is today. But there is one legend who was truly an American hero, the man who personifies the roots of the sport. His name, Junior Johnson. It's no secret how Junior Johnson got his experience behind the wheel. Junior hauled moonshine in the mountains for his father's still. He had to outrun the law, thus he learned how to drive fast. He earned his first Grand National victory in 1955 at Hickory, North Carolina. That victory led to a contract with Ford Motor Company the following year. Unfortunately, the money Junior earned in racing didn't match the money he'd make running moonshine. so he continued to be involved with his father's business. By 1960, that business was really not as attractive money-wise, and that's when Junior started to shine. He'd win the 1960 Daytona 500 and go on to win 50 Grand National races before he'd retire at the young age of 34. He would continue to influence the sport for more than 30 years after that as a car owner, tallying 139 wins and influencing some of the greatest drivers of each era. David Pearson, Cale Yarborough, Darrell Waltrip, and Bill Elliott, to name a few. Truly, if there was a man besides NASCAR founder Bill France Sr. that personified the sport, it's Junior Johnson.
Absolute charger. Only way I ever saw him drive. Did the same thing out here at Charlotte one year in the fall. He essentially drove the tires off the car. He was winning the race. I mean, he was going to win it big. And 4 or 5 laps ago, he had to cut a tire, blew a tire, or whatever. And funny thing about that, this radio announcer, we didn't have TV then, did this dramatic build-up and goes and sticks the microphone in Junior's window. Said, "What happened, Junior?" Just same tone of voice you've always heard him talk. He said, "I blow the tar."
Junior Johnson was an original, and so was our next driver. He had the perfect nickname for a race car driver, Glenn Fireball Roberts. Believe it or not, Fireball Roberts didn't get his nickname from any maneuver on the racetrack. Rather, it was because of his unbelievable pitching arm. Apparently, his fastball was a smoker. Thus, his pals tagged him Fireball. Roberts was the first superstar in stock car racing. From the moment his career began in 1947 through its tragic end in 1964, he won 34 races. He could outdrive anyone on the track in those years. And remember, he was battling some of the greats: Lee Petty, Curtis Turner, Junior Johnson, just to name a few. He was the Dale Earnhardt of the day. He'd win at Darlington in the Southern 500 twice. He was a crowd pleaser. Unfortunately, Fireball would die 6 weeks after a fiery crash at Charlotte on May 24th, 1964, 4 months after Joe Weatherly's fatal crash.
He had a sense of the public image. He always dressed neatly, handled himself well, learned to speak well, was good for the interviews, had the image of a professional athlete who happened to be one who drove race cars for a living and not play one of the stick and ball sports. But he was probably the original superstar of the sport. This was in the early 60s. He was pretty much the king of Daytona. At the time, they had the Hickok belt for outstanding athletes, and Fireball won it for his 1962 performance in Daytona when he won the pole in the qualifying race and the 500. First time the sweep was ever done. And went on and he won Darlington several times. He won the only caution-free race at Darlington in '63. But he was sought after by the media, and TV was in its infancy at the time, pretty much as far as race coverage goes, but he was one of the popular ones because he always looked good on TV. He had a photogenic face. He had the ability to speak to the cameras and to the fans, and was another one who would take his time and talk to fans or talk to industrial engineers. He wanted to be an automotive engineer at one time. He went to the University of Florida and studied automotive engineering. Unfortunately, the math courses knocked him out. He knew it worked. He just couldn't prove it did mathematically on a piece of paper, but he could prove it with a race car.
Fireball Roberts, Curtis Turner, Lee Petty, they were all the forefathers of NASCAR racing. Their legend would influence future generations of the sport for many years. As the 60s continued, new stars were born, and one of the rising names would be the 6th on our legend list. He was from Timmonsville, South Carolina. He was a bit smaller and stockier than some of his contemporaries, but there was no doubting his courage and desire to win. His name was Cale Yarborough. When fans think of Cale Yarborough, they think of this intense, tough, greasy guy who had an intense desire to win throughout his career.
When you get in a race car, though, that's all business then. And, you know, so some of the pictures you're talking about is when I just got out of a race car and I'm tired and dirty and greasy, but, you know, game face. I was just thinking, you know, how many boxers do you see smiling when they're out there fighting? You know, they're there for business, and I was there for business too, and that's wasn't much smiling going on when I was behind the wheel.
Cale Yarborough did just about anything to make a living in the days before he could race full-time. He started out in the pulpwood business, stripping pulp out of trees to sell on a local farm. At the same time, he began to raise turkeys to sell for market. Yeah, I said turkeys. And he played semi-pro football. Cale was always looking at different business deals to help his family. All the while, he kept up his racing interest. His first big break came at the famous Holman Moody race team, but not as a driver.
Then I moved to Charlotte, and so I could be close to it. Went to work for Holman & Moody, $1.25 an hour, sweeping the floor at the Holman & Moody shop. And so I could be there if something happened, just like I had done at the racetracks. Put me in, here I am, you know, and it paid off.
You know, through his driving career, Cale would win 3 championships in a row, a feat no other driver has ever been able to accomplish. His career wins tallied 83, including 4 in the Daytona 500. But Cale might be most famous for a race he didn't win in 1979.
They're out of turn 2. They're down the backstretch. Here goes Cale on the inside. Cale makes the move. He's down very close to the grass. Down he tries to shut him off. Cale's in the grass. Cale loses it. He tries to pull it back. Downey side by side. They make contact. Both head toward the wall. They hit the wall. And turn number 3 will have a new leader.
I had Donnie set up just like I wanted him for that last lap slingshot. And when I came down, go by him, he came down too, and finally got me off in the dirt there at 200 miles an hour, and I had no control over the car, and it came back on the racetrack and tangled us both up, put us both in the wall, and there Richard was a half a lap back and went on to victory lane.
The finish was remarkable, but it would be the emotional aftermath between Donnie, his brother Bobby, and Cale that would make a national TV audience enthralled.
Yeah, I was upset. There wasn't a fist fight. There was a little shoving match. It should have been a fist fight. But, you know, those things happen in the world of sports. Donnie Allison is one of my best friends. Bobby Allison is one of my best friends. Those things happen. It happened that day, but we've been friends ever since. As a matter of fact, I'm an honorary member of the Alabama gang.
There was no doubt on how tough Cale Yarborough could be in any situation, on or off the track. During the 1970s, a driver arrived on the scene that was as boisterous and colorful as Cale was tough. He may have been candid, but he backed himself up on the racetrack. Cale nicknamed him Jaws because he was constantly mouthing off to someone. His name? A young DW, Darrell Waltrip. Darrell Waltrip's colorful career began in the racetrack surrounding his hometown of Owensboro, Kentucky, and Tennessee. He invaded the series in 1972, where he ran 5 races. Racing was his business, and in 1976, he hooked up with car owner Bill Gardner, where for 4 years he would mold his name into the record books. At the end of 1980, he would sign with legendary team owner Junior Johnson. In fact, it was rival Cale Yarborough who allowed DW to hook up with Junior. Cale was Junior's driver at the time. Late in the 1980 season, Junior and Cale were going to meet with Mountain Dew for a sponsorship when Cale was sidetracked. As he was about to leave his home to meet with the men, he ran into his young daughter who was sitting outside with her friend. Cale told them to go ride their bikes, and they said they couldn't because they were broken. Cale said, "Why didn't you tell me?" His daughter said, "I did, 6 times." Cale turned around, changed clothes, and called Junior saying he couldn't make it, and he fixed the bikes. Thus, he opened the door for DW, and the rest, as they say, is history. Darrell represented the changing of the guard in NASCAR racing. In 1979, he would go head-to-head with the reigning king for the championship. He'd win 7 times that year, but one of those would come at Darlington in the Rebel 400, in a race that would epitomize their season.
You can see it happening right before you. They're coming to turn 3. 2 more turns to go. Richard Petty still side by side. Donnie Allison still hanging in 3rd. Oh! Petty has got to leave, and there comes Walter down below him as Petty slid up high. Donnie Allison trying to move past Petty into 2nd place. They're coming to the finish line. It is Darrell Waltrip winning the Rebel 500. Petty is 2nd.
We come down to the white flag, and as I said, we passed each other 4 times. And we go into the 3rd turn, and we're side by side. Richard's on the inside. He's got the preferred line. Donnie is lingering back just far enough so that when we crash, he can get through. We get to the third turn. I run Richard in as far as I can run him, and then I just slam on the brakes. Richard goes in too hard. He goes up the hill. I turn hard left, get in the gas, drive between him and Donnie Allison, pass Richard because he's about to hit the wall, get the lead, win the race.
He just wound up being in the lead on the right time. If it'd been another lap, I'd have probably been in the lead. It was very exciting. It was a super race. You know what I mean? Even though you run second, you teed off at yourself for letting somebody beat you, but you knew you was in a race and you know you did as good as you could, and you know you felt real good about it.
DW would come out on top in that race, but would lose the championship by a mere 11 points to the King. DW's day would come as he would clinch 3 championships in the 80s driving for Junior Johnson: 1981, 1982, and 1985.
Best at gamesmanship in a championship race I ever saw. Bobby Allison said that Darrell absolutely talked him out of the title in '82. Said we were worried more about what he was going to say next than we were about preparing the cars. And he's done some neat things that you wouldn't see other athletes do. Like in '79 when he won his first super speedway race, Rebel 500 at Darlington. It's dark, the moon is rising over turn 3, and all of a sudden we're still riding, of course, and you hear someone singing in the background, "I'll see you in my dreams." And it's Darrell. He's come back to the press box and he's singing, got his arms spread out, looking to Soul Speedway. Great story.
But through it all, there was one race that eluded Jaws: Daytona. For 17 years, he tried to win the big one, and finally, in 1989, he'd do it. He edged out Hendrick teammate Ken Schrader for the win. His wacky dance, dubbed the Icky Shuffle, named for a Super Bowl hero, in Victory Lane, would end a long wait for a win at the famed Speedway. In 1990, DW would cross over into the car owner category as well, as he would field Chevrolets. He'd go on to win 6 races as a car owner. One strange win came to DW at Darlington in 1992. Davey Allison was going for Winston's $1 million bonus by winning 3 of the 4 crown jewel races in the sport. Davey was in a position to win all day, but the entire race was threatened by rain. During the mid-race, rain was imminent, but the drivers were in a pit window. Davey had no choice but to come down pit road for service. DW, being the wily old veteran he was, chose to gamble and stay out. His gamble paid off, and while Davey left disappointed, DW was doing a rain dance to Victory Lane.
He's accomplished so much here, you know. He's won 3 championships. I think he's the
Entire team, guys that work on my car.
leading winner of active drivers. He's won over 80 races, and plus he's had a flair about him. He's always been able to create some excitement and attention over his career, and those types of things, I don't think any driver starting out now will ever win 80 races. And so that number is one that'll stand up toward the top for many years to come. And winning 3 championships is quite an accomplishment, too.
If nothing else, I got good timing. The sport was kind of in a lull with Petty and Yarborough and Allison and Baker and Benny and all those guys. Nothing really exciting going on. And so if there was ever a Mr. Excitement off the racetrack, I think I filled that bill. And kind of enjoyed it. I mean, I like to have fun. I've always enjoyed cutting up, having a big time, and I believe in taking risks, but I believe in taking calculated risks. I believe in letting it hang out if it's worth it. I believe that you can intimidate people just as easily by being crafty as you can by being crude. And so I've always tried to be crafty.
Darrell's has been one of the greatest race drivers this sport ever has had. His ability and uniqueness of the way he goes about racing and psyching out his opponents and stuff is really one of a kind type guy. So he'll go down in the history of this sport as one of the greatest races we've had.
Darrell Waltrip was really the first driver to come along that people associated with the corporate boardroom, with dress slacks maybe instead of jeans. And I think Darrell Waltrip was really the first driver who stood out to make that bridge, to start the bridge of bringing in the different fans. And the thing about Darrell also, I think a lot of people have just recently begun to understand Darrell's sense of humor since he is more on TV and because of TV's exposure that TV has given racing.
To this date, Darrell is still active on the Winston Cup circuit with 84 career wins and still carries on with his wacky outlook on life. Now, the man tied with DW on the all-time win list is someone who has come up earlier in our tape, Bobby Allison. Bobby's story is a little different than that of Jaws. Born in South Florida, Bobby Allison knew he wanted to race from the time he was a little boy. He raced everything and anything, anywhere, any day of the week, much like current-day race car driver Kenny Schrader. He got his start at Hialeah Speedway in Florida, where his success was legendary. Bobby first drove for himself, and then for other legends like Cotton Owens and Junior Johnson. Through his driving, Bobby heard about big money to be made in the short tracks of Alabama and Georgia. He hooked up with his brother Donnie and friend Red Farmer to check it all out. Thus, Bobby decided to settle in a place called Hueytown to be closer to the action. The rest of the gang followed. Thus, the Alabama Gang was born. They were an innovative group who raced hard, but also worked on their own cars. And there were times they came up with some new twists that have become part of racing today.
Bobby Allison was a tremendous driver, tremendous amount of driving talent, but he also was a great car builder. He really started and changed the way Winston Cup race cars developed through the years, building his own cars and developing a new type of chassis, the front steer race car, which was predominantly used now in Winston Cup racing. Bobby was a fierce competitor. Don't get me wrong, Bobby on the racetrack was tough, very hard to handle. Off the racetrack, he was there to help you. You know, if you needed a hand, you had a question for him, especially as a rookie like myself coming in when Bobby was in his heyday in Winston Cup racing. I could always go to Bobby and get a straight answer, and you know, that means an awful lot when you're getting a straight answer out of a competitor.
He was someone that I looked up to, but yet he was so down to earth and came to the grassroots of racing in the Midwest and took time to talk to me and help me with my career and those kind of things. I really looked up to Bobby and still do. I think he's a whale of a man.
Allison would go on to win the Winston Cup Championship after being the bridesmaid many times. Perhaps his most emotional victory would be at Daytona in 1988, when it came down to a battle between father and son. The two would battle neck and neck through the final laps. Father Bobby would win with Davey second. It was the happiest day in Allison family history as the celebration in Victory Lane went on for hours. Tragically, later that year, Bobby's career would come to a sudden halt with a violent crash at Pocono in June. Bobby would suffer head injuries that would separate him from the sport that he most truly loved and the sport that truly loved him. Bobby Allison was so well-liked that the fans would vote him most popular 6 times. It was evident that no matter where he raced or what he raced, the fans loved him. Another fan favorite who liked to shake things up and went head-to-head with anyone was the incredible Silver Fox, David Pearson. South Carolina's David Pearson first hit the NASCAR scene in 1960. He had a low-key, unassuming personality, and he made heads turn fast. He wouldn't win a race in 1960, but he would become Rookie of the Year. Ironically, 1 year earlier, his biggest rival, Richard Petty, would earn the same honor, thus setting up the stage for the rivalry that would span 2 decades and their entire careers. When Pearson did win, it was a big one. It would happen at Charlotte in the World 600 in 1961. He would be driving for Ray Fox, an early car builder who gave chances to lots of up-and-comers and was a very successful car owner. It was a dream situation and victory for the youngster they called Little David at the time. What was phenomenal about the win was that he finished the race on 3 tires when he suffered a flat with 2 laps to go and stayed out. Remarkably, he had enough of a lead to cross the finish line, holding on to first place, showering sparks as he took the checkered flag. David would go on to drive for the Wood brothers for 7 years. During that span of time, his rivalry with Richard Petty would really heat up.
Pearson was a type guy that he never told you. He always made it look like he couldn't do what he could do. He always played it down, and he'd always come through with more than what he said. Like, for instance, that race with he and Petty, he says, I'm doing all I can do. He says, I can't pass him. But he did, you know, going down the back straightaway. I mean, he always wanted to, I don't think he did it just to be, not tell us the truth. I think he wanted to have a satisfaction of doing what he said he could do, you know. I mean, he didn't want to say he could do it and not do it.
That deal in 1976 with Petty has become legend and was the race that put NASCAR racing on the map. On a Sunday afternoon in Daytona, their rivalry came to a head when neither would give an inch to the other, and the results were fireworks.
As they hit the banking, they're 3 abreast with a lapped car. Pearson moves in front of the STP Dodge. Petty comes back to the inside. They almost touch as they move down low in the banking. They're going to be side by side as they exit the bank and head for the finish line. Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is sliding, slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? He's still moving. The car stops 300, 400 feet shy of the finish line. Pearson is still running. Here's Petty trying to fire to come across the line. David Pearson moving down through as they come to the stripe. The winner is car number 21.
He really had me beat if we hadn't wrecked. And, of course, I waited and waited and drafted by him going down the backstretch, in which he just come right back around me between 3 and 4. And coming off of 4, I guess he thought he was by me or something, and anyway, when he pulled up, he wasn't quite by me, and of course, his right rear hit my left front, and when it did, both of us spun around and crashed and hit the wall and everything else. When we hit, naturally, I didn't know where he was at, and I was spinning around, and the Wood boys said I was on the radio talking to them while I was spinning, hollering, where's he at, where's he at, because I couldn't see him on kind of the smoke and stuff coming up, but after we stopped and everything cleared, you know, I kept on going.
That win put the now called Silver Fox in every major headline. Pearson had been labeled the Silver Fox because of a combination of the silver color of his hair, and he was sly as a fox on the racetrack. Those attributes shone bright at his home track in Darlington. Pearson would win there 10 times, including a win in 1979 that people still marvel over. In the fall Darlington race, a rookie driver named Dale Earnhardt had taken a serious tumble in a race at Pocono, forcing him to miss the race at the track Too Tough to Tame. Pearson had been relieved of his ride with the Wood brothers earlier in the year. That allowed David to get the call and fill in. He not only filled in, but he would go on to win the race after time off. A phenomenal feat.
I was fortunate to work with David Pearson in 1983 and 84, and of course, maybe he was past his prime at that stage, but you know, I even saw a lot of the things that I know the Wood brothers got to experience when David was in his best, you know, how sneaky he was in practice. I remember the first race, I went to work for him and went to Darlington, and we was maybe a second off the pace, and nobody seemed concerned, and I was a little, you know, timid, and I said, you know, guys, we're a second off, and David said, we'll be fine. We went out there and sat on the outside pole, you know, and that was just David's style. He never showed his hand, even in the races. It's like he just certainly showed up near the end of the race and I was there at the end, but I certainly would edge David toward the top of that list.
In all, Pearson would win 75% of all the races he ever entered, for a grand total of 105 wins. A winning percentage that will be tough to match. You know, we mentioned that Pearson was the young gun of his day. Well, there are some young guns currently in the sport that have the potential to enter our list someday and become the greatest of all time. 1989 Winston Cup champion Rusty Wallace stormed on the scene in 1980 and never looked back. Rubberhead, as he was named by rival driver Dale Earnhardt in the late 80s, has always bounced back from whatever has come his way. In 1993, he'd win 10, and in 1994, 8. It was during the 1993 season that Wallace took a tumble through the tri-oval at Talladega that ultimately would cost him a second championship. But it could have been even worse.
They come through the tri-oval. Checkered is waving. Ernie Irvan wins, and Rusty spins and gets airborne and flips wildly right at the start-finish line. Very reminiscent of his accident at Daytona.
Wallace would come back that season and go on to more success for his Penske Racing crew. But when you look at comebacks and future greats, you'd have to consider Ernie Irvan, the man that proved that a miracle can happen. Swervin' Irvan, a man with an uncontrollable desire to win, had infuriated fellow competitors with his wayward ways on the track and amazed those who viewed the races as a guy who could make things happen on the racetrack. He may be laid back off the track, but when the green flag waved, he'd go to the front. In 1992 at Sears Point, he'd be penalized a lap for jumping the start and weave his way back to the field to win. In 1993 at Talladega, in a final 3-lap dash, he would go from 5th to 1st in an incredible 1 lap to take the checkered flag as Rusty Wallace tumbled down the tri-oval. But perhaps his most incredible comeback came in 1995, when he returned behind the wheel of a race car at North Wilkesboro after a life-threatening crash at Michigan the year before. He had been given a 10% chance to live and incredibly survived. No one expected him to live, nevertheless drive again. His hard work to come back paid off with 2 victories in 1996 at Loudon and Richmond, a feat that hopefully will never have to be matched again.
That was something we set our mind to do at the beginning of the year, and I set my mind to do that, 2 years before that, and it was just it was a major accomplishment. It's a lot like winning your first race, but it was probably even more satisfying for us because we had been in victory lane before, and it had been so long now, and everything that we had to go through to be able to do that, I mean, that just makes you appreciate it more.
For him to go through what he did and survive, and then to come back and to be able to race again, I mean, it's phenomenal.
Rusty and Ernie have had tremendous careers thus far and will soon make our list. But there is one driver who is considered a phenom, who has accomplished so much in 3 short years on the circuit. His name, Jeff Gordon. By year 3 on the tour, this 25-year-old from Pittsboro, Indiana, has already been crowned champion and has had incredible influence on up-and-coming generations.
It's unlimited to what he can achieve in the sport. I think he is far, far better than anyone thought that we'd ever see come along again.
What he is the vanguard of the movement ahead that's going to attract sponsors and team owners to quality young drivers not necessarily bred on this circuit.
Gordon already has nearly 20 wins in his short career and could set some new marks along the way to legendary status. He is sure to be a great one. Gordon may have his work cut out for him, though, with our next great still in his prime. This guy is known as the Intimidator. When he races, watch out. The numbers speak for themselves. 7 Winston Cup titles, a feat that matches Richard Petty's, 70 wins, and a presence and style that has impacted the entire sport.
Well, the style that Dale Earnhardt drives with is a very hard, aggressive driving style. He can drive a loose race car and hang it out. He is an expert in knowing where he can tag a car and how that car will react.
Dale could possibly be the best racer this sport's ever seen.
Anytime, and I didn't care where he started, if you kept your eye on Dale, he was going to put on the type of show that you wanted to pay to see.
Dale Earnhardt watched his dad, Ralph, race on the bull rings around North Carolina, and in the process learned everything he could about a race car. That knowledge paid off early as he earned his first full-time ride in 1979 from Rod Osterlund. He'd win 1 race in 27 tries, that win coming at Bristol, Tennessee, and most importantly, he'd be named Rookie of the Year. Remarkably, 1 year later, he'd be crowned Winston Cup champion. As the 80s progressed, Earnhardt's big break would come from accepting an invitation to drive for Richard Childress. From 1984 through the current day, the two have combined for 61 wins and 6 championships. but most importantly, created the moments that have sealed the legend of Dale Earnhardt. For the Intimidator could do things behind the wheel that seemed out of reach to the average man. Like 1987, the legendary pass in the grass during the Winston All-Star race.
And Earnhardt loses it, goes on the grass, comes back, and Elliott goes inside. And Earnhardt still got the lead. Incredible.
I'm, to this day, in awe of Winston in 1987, the famous pass in the grass. And I'll tell you why. The pass happened right under us in the press box, not the pass. Actually, it was a bump into the grass. I saw them coming out of the fourth turn. It was Bill Elliott and Dale Earnhardt coming out of the fourth turn. And Bill was on the outside and Dale was on the inside. And you could see Bill's Thunderbird just, sort of jerk off to the left a little bit, just a little bit. And I saw Dale's tires get in the grass. And this is where I'll never forget the race, and for the reason why. Everything from that point that I saw Dale move to the inside of the track to the grass to the time when he came back onto the track off the grass is transposed in my memory forever in slow motion. That day I saw that whole thing in slow motion. He went off the track, I could see the dust flying, I could look down and see him holding both hands on the steering wheel, never wavering, and keeping the car pointed straight and come back in front of Bill. Tom Higgins was sitting next to me, he was on his feet. He's never stood up before or since for anything that happened on a track. I was leaning over to the front row of the press box watching this. And I thought to myself, I know that there have been other things in racing that have been just as dramatic as that. I'm sure that there have been drivers that have made more spectacular saves. But the whole thing happening so close to us, so fixed in front of us, it was just something I'll never forget. And I think that that one certainly ranks as perhaps the most impressive and certainly the most riveting to me.
The scariest moment in Earnhardt's career would come in 1996. While battling for the lead at Talladega in July, he would tumble down the front stretch in a terrifying wreck. The crash would be the most serious of his career and cost him a chance at his 8th Winston Cup title, a mark that he desperately wants to reach before the twilight of his career. Unlike his crash his rookie year, this time Earnhardt would not miss starting a race. During this stretch, race fans would see the incredible courage that has become synonymous with Dale. At Indianapolis, he would have to relinquish his ride at the first caution to newcomer Mike Skinner, a heartbreaking moment for the champion. Then at Watkins Glen, New York, on the road course, he would qualify his car on the pole, and in obvious pain would drive the entire race, moments that truly signify the greatness and bravery of the man. While some say Dale Earnhardt is the greatest driver of all time, there is still one man who is considered the greatest and the king of NASCAR stock car racing. His incredible career spanned 5 decades, and through those years he personified the courage, tenacity, and desire it took to make a living in stock car racing. And he smiled all the while he did it. His name, the one and only Richard Petty. Richard grew up watching his dad Lee race, creating the Petty legend. Richard would carry the torch for the family upon Lee's retirement and not let a single soul down. His first victory came at the Charlotte Fairgrounds in 1960. The headline read, "Dick Petty wins race." His mother told him, "Your name is Richard and always will be Richard." And from then on, every win was credited to Richard. By 1967, 9 years into his career, Richard would break Father Lee's career win mark by tallying his 55th career victory at Darlington. And through 1981, he would record 7 championships. By 1984, Richard was poised to post the all-time career win mark by earning his 200th, a mark along with records he set in 1967 for consecutive wins, 10, and wins in a season, 27, that no one may ever come near again.
Richard Petty could drive a race car, and you add that to what he had and the number of opportunities he had to win races, 52 races in one season, for example. And sure, it piled up. The numbers piled up. And I don't care if there were 100 races in one season. To win 27 in 1 year, 10 in a row, is mind-boggling. I really don't believe that could be done today.
The setting for Richard's 200th win was one no one will soon forget. Richard's chance at immortality would come down to a dash for the caution flag late in the race as he tried to beat one of his closest rivals, Cale Yarborough.
200th win, July the 4th, President of the United States. You win it on the last lap. I mean, you know, it was everything that you would ever want to get into one race. We put it all together in one day. At that time, Cale was running super good, and I was running super good, so we got to racing with each other, and come down to the last 4 or 5 laps. You know, we've been changing the lead, and I think we just got in line, and he was following me, waiting for the last lap. We ran side to side down the front stretch, and I had the inside groove on him, and we touched a few times, but anyhow, when we got to the start-finish line, I beat him by a couple of 3 feet.
I had him set up right exactly where I wanted him, waiting for that final lap. Slingshot him to the finish there, and the caution flag came out with 3 laps to go. I said, this thing's gonna finish under caution. I gotta go now. I don't have time to set him up like I would have if it was 2 laps later. And so I made a run at him and got by him down the backstretch, but didn't have enough momentum to stay in front of him, you know, till we got to the start-finish line. He beat me just a foot.
Beyond the records, wins, and on-track accomplishments, what made Richard transcend the sport was his accessibility to fellow racers and fans. He always greeted people, no matter who they were, with a smile, and is legendary for the numerous autographs he still signs to this day.
He won more races than anybody, more championships than anybody. He's done more for the sport than anybody. We all look up to him at how he did in his, especially his farewell tour. To be that patient with the fans, to be able to do as much stuff as he did, just gives us somebody to look up to. And to me, that's a legend. You know, that's somebody we're always going to remember. Richard Petty will always be Richard Petty. He's the same in the morning as he in the afternoon.
First met him when I was 12 years old, and right then and there, I knew that that was a man from upstate New York was where I met him, when he was running Malta. And that day, I knew that this is what I wanted to do, believe it or not.
He set a standard for our sport that is being continued on today. You know, NASCAR Winston Cup racing is noted for the fact that its players, its stars are accessible by their fans so much more than any other sport. And I think a lot of that is contributed to Richard's efforts early on in his career and continued on throughout his career right to the end to make sure that, you know, we all took care of the fans, gave the fans what they deserved on the racetrack as well as off.
I'm so glad and I'm so pleased that I got to compete against Richard when he was as good as he was ever, when he was at his best, and I was at my best. We went head-to-head on a number of occasions, and I won some, he won some. But, you know, it's just the image thing. I think that one thing we all come down to with Richard is forget the 200 wins and the 7 championships or whatever else he may have done, but it's his image. Even when Richard would do something wrong, people seem to be able to accept it and forgive him for it.
Probably the all-around greatest sportsman and driver that this sport will ever see. He's done more for racing than any one person I know of other than Bill France Sr. His ability to attract the fans and promote the sport is beyond belief by anybody, including me.
You know, it's just a situation, again, that you've been anywhere doing something for 35 years and you've been through with a lot of legends, then you sort of get bunched in with them. And it's a great feeling to be able to have people look at you from that standpoint, and they look at you from a legend instead of a has-been is a lot better.
Well, that will do it for our visit with the greatest drivers of all time, except for the results of our exclusive poll. Who are the actual top 10? Well, according to a survey we conducted among the top journalists covering the sport, we were right on. They came up with the same list we did. Of course, a list like this is as subjective as it gets. I'll tell you this, there's a lot of people who would have Earnhardt at the top, and who could argue? In any event, as time goes on, some of the new guard, the Jeff Gordons, Ernie Irvins and Rusty Wallaces, plus the kids still cutting their teeth out on the Saturday night short tracks, they could all join this list. But no one will ever really replace the legends that molded and influenced our sport of NASCAR stock car racing to make it what it is today. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks for strolling down NASCAR's memory lane here at the North Carolina Auto Racing Museum. I'm Jerry Punch. So long, everyone.